Hello and welcome to Elemental Hardware Enrichment. My name is Aiden and today we're going to be building a portable stool. Before we get started with building, let's go ahead and introduce the supplies that we're going to need for this project. So for this project, we're going to need a damp rag for glue cleanup, a hammer block, some sandpaper, a hardware tray for our hardware parts, a bottle of glue, and our safety glasses. Let's go ahead and put those on now. Now that we've gotten all of our supplies, let's go ahead and talk about the tools that we're going to need for this project. So I have my toolkit right here. I'm going to go ahead and open it up and take out the tools that I'm going to need. For this project, I'm going to need a hammer, a 9/16 wrench, and a 1/2 inch wrench. Now that I've got all my tools, let's go ahead and close this toolkit up and get it out of our way. All right, I've got my supplies, I've got my tools, so the next step will be to open up the box and talk about what we're going to find inside. Now we're ready to open up our box. To do that, we're going to be using the back of the hammer, and I'm just going to be sliding it down the tape where the two box flaps meet to split it open. Now that I've split the tape, I can go ahead and grab the corners of the box and pry it up. The first thing I'm going to be taking out of my box is some packing paper, and let's make sure to open up the paper to just make sure there are no small parts wrapped up in it before we get it out of our way. Now that we've got the paper out of our box, we can go ahead and talk about what else we're going to find inside. The first thing I'm taking out is this bag of hardware, and I'm just going to put this in my tray for now. We'll talk about it a little bit later. Next, I'm going to be taking out this piece here. You'll notice that this is a large rounded over rectangle, and on one side it has two dados. One is slanted and the other is straight. This will be leg A. Next, we have a very similar piece that also has the two dados, but the slanted dado is actually slanting in the opposite direction, and this is going to be leg B. Next, we have these two pieces, and they are exactly the same. On one side, there is a recessed hole in the center, and on the other side, there's a recessed hole here at the top. And these are going to be our leg C pieces. Along with that, we have these two pieces here, and these are our rounded over rectangle pieces that are going to serve as our cross members. We also have these two pieces that are rounded over on three sides with one flat edge and a hole going straight through, and these are going to be our stretchers. Next, we have this piece here, which has three holes bored into the flat edge, and this is going to be the leg stop for our stool. The last piece we're going to be taking out is the largest piece, and this is going to be our seat. You'll notice that the top of the seat has these three holes, and on the back, the holes are there as well, but it also has these dados running through it. Again, this is going to be our seat. Now that we've got everything out of the box, let's go ahead and get it out of our way. All right, we've introduced all of our wood pieces, so the next step is going to be to introduce our hardware. I'm going to go ahead and open up my hardware bag and talk about each piece individually. The first thing I'm taking out is my red dot bag, which is going to have my dowels. Next, I have a green dot bag with my finish nails. And now I have a blue dot bag. Inside this blue dot bag, I have carriage bolts, I have acorn nuts, I have my lock washers, and I have my flat washers. Let's go ahead and take those out and talk about each one. So here we have our carriage bolts. We have our acorn nuts. We have our internal tooth lock washers, and you can see the little teeth running around it on the inside. And we also have our flat washers. These ones look like little donuts. Now that we've introduced all of our hardware and wood parts, the next step will be to sand all of our pieces to get them prepped for the build. Let's go ahead and get started with sanding. So to sand my pieces, I'm going to be using my hammer block and my sandpaper. I'm going to flip the sandpaper over so that the smooth side faces up, and I'm going to place the hammer block right across it and then fold the two halves of the sandpaper over it to make a little sandpaper burrito. Next, I'm going to go ahead and sand all of the edges of my wood parts until they're nice and smooth. So let's go ahead and do that now. Alright, I've sanded the edges of all my parts, and now what I want to do is remove the sandpaper from the sanding block and sand out any of the hard to reach areas on my pieces. So that's going to include these through holes on any of my pieces, as well as the dados on my seat and my legs. So let's go ahead and do that now. Alright, I've got all my pieces nicely sanded, so the last step is just going to be to use my rag to wipe up any of the dust. Alright, we've got all our pieces nicely prepped and sanded, so we're ready to move into our build. The first step of the build will be to begin to assemble the legs for our portable stool. Alright, we're ready to begin assembling the legs for our stool. So I'm going to start by placing leg A onto my desk so that the dados face down. I'm then going to open up my green dot bag and remove the nails. I'm just going to dump those into my tray. Now I'm going to go ahead and place one nail into each of the pre-drilled nail holes on leg A. Once I've got my nails in place, I'm going to go ahead and grab one of my cross members. It doesn't matter which one, they're both exactly the same. I'm going to stand this cross member up tall on my desk. I'm going to remove the red cap from my glue and place it into my tray so I don't lose it. And then I'm going to place a large bead of glue over the top of this piece. Because this is a project that's going to be weight bearing, it's really important that we use a lot of glue for each step. So I'm going to spread a nice healthy amount right on top here. And when I spread it out with my finger, I want to make sure that it's completely covering this edge. And it's okay if there's a little bit left over dripping on the sides or on your finger. You can just go ahead and wipe your finger clean and then use the rag to clean up the edges. Once you've got your glue on there, you're going to go ahead and lift up your leg, and you're going to be lining up this cross member with the straight dado in leg A. It's very important that this lines up properly, so take your time to line it up evenly. Once you have it lined up, go ahead and double check that everything is fitting properly and that it's not off center in any way. If you'd like, you can use your remaining cross member to balance everything while you hammer it in. Before we hammer, we're going to do a last check to make sure we're lined up with our dado. And then we're going to hold everything in place and we're going to tack in our first nail. Once you have your first nail tacked in, double check that you're still aligned properly. And then you can go ahead and hammer off that second nail. Once the second nail is all the way in there, go ahead and finish off the first nail. Once you have your nails all the way in, go ahead and lay your piece down, and now we can wipe up any excess glue that might be spilling out. Now, because we use so much glue in that step, there's almost definitely going to be some spilling out, but that's a good sign. That means we used enough, and you can always just clean it up with your rag. Now that we've got our glue cleaned up, we're ready to attach our next cross member. So go ahead and grab your remaining cross member and stand it up tall. And just like before, we're going to be placing a large bead of glue onto the top here. Once you've done that, go ahead and spread it evenly with your finger. Remember, you want to cover the entire edge with glue. You really shouldn't see the wood at all underneath your glue. Once you've got that spread evenly, go ahead and wipe your finger clean. And you can check to see if you have any spilling over the edge and wipe that up as well. Now we're going to be aligning this cross member with the slanted dado in leg A. So just like before, it's very important that these line up properly. So take your time to align them evenly. Once it's all lined up, we're going to place it just like this and take a little bit more time just to make sure that we're aligned properly before we hammer in our nails. When you're ready, you're going to hold your pieces together and tack in your first nail. Once that nail's tacked in, go ahead and double check your alignment before you hammer in your second nail. Once you have that second nail in there, you can finish off the first one. And the last step now is just to wipe up any excess glue. All right, we've got both our cross members attached to leg A, so now we're going to go ahead and attach leg B. So I'm going to grab leg B, and just like before, I'm going to flip it over so that the dado is face down. I'm then going to be placing a finish nail into each of the pre-drilled nail holes on leg B. Once I've got my nails in there, I'm now going to be spreading glue onto the up-facing edges of these two cross members. Again, quick reminder to make sure to use plenty of glue for this step. Once you've got the glue on there, let's spread it out evenly using a finger. Just like before, we can go ahead and wipe our finger clean. And now we're going to be lining up the cross members so that the dados so that they fit onto these cross members. I'm going to be starting with the straight cross member just because I think it's a little bit easier to line up. Once I have it lined up, I'm going to go ahead and just double check that everything fits properly. I'm going to hold it in place and I'm going to tack in my first nail. Once I've tacked in that nail, I'm going to double check my alignment and then I'll hammer off my second nail. And then I can go ahead and finish the first one. All right, we have that first one done, so now let's go ahead and line up our slanted cross member. We want to make sure it fits perfectly into our dado, so we're going to take some time to make sure it's aligned properly. We're then going to hold it in place and tack in our first nail. Once we've tacked that in, let's double check that we're still lined up. Everything looks good, so let's finish off our nails. Now that we've got our nails finished off, the last thing to do is just going to be to wipe up any excess glue. And just like that, we have the inner legs for our portable stool completed. So the next step is going to be to attach the outer legs to this assembly. All right, we're ready to begin attaching the outer legs to our portable stool assembly. So for this, we're going to need one of our leg C pieces. It doesn't matter which one because they're exactly the same. And you're going to place this down onto your workstation so that the recessed hole in the center of the piece faces up. I'm then going to go ahead and grab one of my carriage bolts, and I'm going to lift this piece and place the carriage bolt in so that the head of the carriage bolt rests right in that recessed area. I'm then going to dump out my blue dot bag, and I'm going to pick up a flat washer, and I'm going to be placing that right onto the carriage bolt, just like that. Once I've done that, I'm going to flip this whole thing over and place it through the up-facing center hole in leg B. Now you'll notice that there's also a hole here in leg C, and I actually want to orient that so that it's above my slanted cross member. If you do this wrong, you can always adjust it later, but I like to just have everything oriented properly from the jump. Once I've done that, I'm actually going to hold this together and flip everything over. And I'm going to go ahead and place another washer onto that carriage bolt. Once I've got my washer on there, I can go ahead and place a lock washer. Remember, these are internal tooth lock washers, so they have these little teeth around the inside. And we're just going to place that right on top. Once we've done that, we can pick up one of our hex nuts, and we're going to screw that on as tightly as we can using our fingers. Once we've got that as tight as we can with our fingers, we're going to locate our 1/2-inch wrench, and we're going to be using the closed end of the wrench to continue to tighten this hex bolt until it's just about as tight as we can get it. As we're tightening this, we want to check the leg. We honestly want to tighten this until we can just barely move the leg. So I'm going to go a little bit tighter. And I'm going to check my leg, and it's super tight there. So I'm going to loosen it just about 1/4 of a turn. And just after loosening it, I should be able to move my leg back and forth freely, but everything is still secured together. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and pick up one of my acorn nuts, and I'm going to be screwing this onto the top here. And I'm just going to screw it on as tightly as I can with my fingers, and then I'm going to be picking up my 9/16 wrench and using the closed end of this wrench to tighten this down until it's as tight as I can get it. You might need to hold everything together while you tighten this. And you may find that as you're tightening, everything starts to rotate a little bit. That means it's just about as tight as it's going to get. Now we'll go ahead and check, and we can still move our leg back and forth freely, but everything is secured in place. So now we're going to go ahead and actually repeat all of those steps on the opposite side. So I'm going to grab my remaining leg C, flip it over so that this recessed hole in the center faces up. I'm then going to grab a carriage bolt and place it through that center hole so that it rests inside the recess. I'll flip it over and attach a washer. And then I'll hold everything together and place it through the center hole in leg A. Once I've got that in place, I'm going to rotate this around so that this pre-drilled hole is oriented towards my slanted cross member, and then I'm going to flip the whole assembly over. Now I'm going to go ahead and place another flat washer onto the carriage bolt, and then I'll place on my lock washer. After that, I can go ahead and screw on my hex nut. Once I've got that hex nut as tight as I can with my fingers, once again, I'm going to use my 1/2-inch wrench and tighten it down just about as tight as I can get it. Once I've got it nice and tight, I'm just going to check if I can still move the leg. And remember, I just want to barely be able to move that leg, so I'm going to tighten it just a little bit more. Again, I'm going to check my leg, and it's just barely moving, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen this about 1/4 of a turn. And now I should be able to move my leg freely while still having everything secured in place. Once I've done that, I can go ahead and pick up my remaining acorn nut and screw that on. Just like before, I'm going to be using my 9/16 wrench. I'm going to hold everything together and tighten that acorn nut. All right, I got that nice and tight. Check my leg, and it should move freely, and everything is secured in place. So just like that, we have attached our outer legs for our portable stool. The next step will be to attach our stretchers. All right, now we're going to go ahead and attach our stretchers. So when we're doing this next step, the orientation of everything is very important. What I want to do is lay my pieces down. And again, I want to double check that the remaining pre-drilled hole in leg C is oriented towards my slanted cross member. And that's going to be the same on both sides. Once I've confirmed that, I'm going to go ahead and lay this piece down so that the slanted cross member slants up and away from the center of the assembly. One way I like to kind of think about it is if you had a little skateboarder skating through here, he could jump off of this and away from the stool. So it's very important to remember that this slanted cross member needs to slant up and away from the center. Now that we've got that oriented correctly, we're going to go ahead and pick up one of our stretchers. And we're going to be attaching our stretcher so that it lines up with the leg like that. Before we do that, we need to pick up one of our remaining carriage bolts. We're going to just barely lift up leg C, and there's a recessed hole on this side facing me, and I'm going to go ahead and place the carriage bolt through there. Once I've done that, I can close the leg, and then I'm going to place on a washer. Once I've got my washer on there, I'm going to orient the stretcher so that the flat edge faces down and that the long side is in line with the other legs. And then I'm going to go ahead and just place that carriage bolt right through the hole in the stretcher. Again, the flat edge of the stretcher faces down and the stretcher is in line with the legs. I'm then going to place on another washer, and then a lock washer, and then I'll screw on my hex nut. Once I've done that, I'm going to lift this up and I'm going to go ahead and tighten that hex nut down so it's super tight. Just like when we were attaching the legs, we want to tighten it so that we can just barely move this stretcher. And it's still moving pretty well, so I'm just going to tighten it just a little bit more. I'm going to check it again, tighten it a little bit more. There we go. So now I can barely move it, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen this about a quarter turn. And then it should move freely while still being secured in place. Now that I've got the hex nut super tight, I can go ahead and attach my acorn nut. And I'm just going to screw that on with my fingers. And then I'm going to use my 9/16 wrench and tighten that together. Just like that, everything's nice and tight and secure, but still moves freely. Now I'm going to go ahead and lay this back down, and I'm going to flip it around so I can do the same thing again. I'm going to pick up my stretcher. Remember, flat edge of the stretcher is going to face down, and the stretcher is going to be in line with our legs. I also want to double check that my slanted cross member is slanting up and away from the center. That's very important. Then I'll go ahead and grab a carriage bolt, lift up leg C, and place the carriage bolt in from the side with the recessed hole. Then I can close that down and place my washer. Once I've done that, I'm going to slide that carriage bolt through the hole in my stretcher. And then I can go ahead and place my last washer and then my lock washer. Once I've done that, I can go ahead and screw on my hex nut. Now that I've got that as tight as I can, I'm actually going to slide this to the edge of the desk so that it can lay flat, and I'm going to use my 1/2-inch wrench to tighten that down. Again, I'm going to check to see if it can move, and it's still moving pretty freely, so let's give it a little bit more. And now it's super tight, so I'm going to go ahead and loosen it about a quarter turn. Again, I'm going to check to make sure it can move freely, and then I'm going to go ahead and screw on my acorn nut. Once I've done that, I can hold everything together and tighten down that acorn nut. All right, and just like that, I've attached the stretchers to my portable stool assembly. So the next step will be to attach all of this to the seat. All right, we're ready to go ahead and attach our leg assembly to our seat. So I'm going to go ahead and move this off to the side just for a second, and I'm going to grab my seat. Now I want to place the seat onto my work surface so that these dados face up. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be spreading some glue into each of these dados. Now this part's a little tricky because we want to use a lot of glue like we did before, but not so much that we're going to overflow the dado. So basically the rule I like to follow is that I want to use enough glue to cover that bottom surface of the dado without extending over the top. So when I spread it out, I should be able to cover the complete and entire bottom of the dado. And that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and do the same thing on this other side. And if you have some glue spilling over the edges, that's fine. Basically, you just don't want to fill the entire dado with glue because then it's going to be hard to fit your pieces in there. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and align the flat edge of our stretchers into these glued dados. But once again, the orientation of this is very important. So what we want to do is make sure that our flat cross member is towards the side with these pre-drilled holes and our slanted cross member faces away from the holes. So I'm going to go ahead and begin to line things up, and the first thing I just want to check is that my orientation is correct. Remember, your flat cross member should be right above the holes, and your slanted cross member should be away from the holes. Once you've done that, you can start to line up the stretchers so that they fit into the dados in the seat. And one thing you can do to make sure that they fit in properly is actually give them a light tap with your hammer. Once you've got one set on one side, go ahead and flip this around, and we're going to go ahead and line up the other side. Now the only thing I want to check is that my other stretcher didn't come out of the dado while I was fitting that one in. And it still looks like it's lined up well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold everything together and flip this over. And what you want to see, like I'm seeing here in a couple of my holes, is some glue spilling out the top. That means that I used plenty of glue inside the dados and it's going to hold everything together. Now I can go ahead and just place a nail into each of the pre-drilled holes here on the top. If you place these nails in and they kind of just fall right through, that's a good indication that your stretchers aren't lined up properly. So if I'm pushing on this, even if I were to use my hammer block, I'm not able to push these down past a certain point because they're making contact with the stretcher, and that's a good sign. Again, you don't want them to just fall right through the hole because that means that there's nothing in the way. That's a good little way to test to make sure that everything is lined up properly. Now that we've got all of our nails in, I'm going to do one last check on this right side here to make sure I'm aligned before I begin hammering in my nails. Got a little bit of glue on my hammer, so I'm just going to wipe that up and then wipe off the top here. And one thing I want to double check is that all of my nails are flush. Because I'm going to be sitting on this part, I don't want my pants to get caught on any nails. So I'm just going to double check that all my nails are nice and flush. All right, now that I have that side done, I'm going to flip this around and I'm going to double check that my stretcher is still lined up within my dado. That looks good, so let's go ahead and hammer off these nails. All right, again, we're going to double check that they're nice and flush, and then we're going to flip this over, and I'm actually going to lift the legs up out of the way so I can wipe up any excess glue. All right, and just like that, we have our leg assembly attached to our seat. So the last step is just going to be to attach our leg stop. All right, we're ready to attach our leg stop and finish off the build on our portable stool. So let's go ahead and open up our remaining bag. That's going to be our red dot bag with our dowels in there. We'll open that up and dump it into our tray. Now, we want to keep the assembly so that the seat is down against the desk and the legs are facing up. And you're going to locate these pre-drilled holes here in the seat. We're going to be placing one dowel into each of these holes, but before we do that, we're going to spread some glue around one of the edges of our dowel. So not on the very bottom, because that's not going to make contact. We're going to go around this rounded edge and spread a nice healthy amount of glue. Once we've done that, we're going to line it up over one of the holes, hold it in place, and tap it down until it's fully set into the hole. Once you have it set, you can move your fingers away and set it into the hole. Once you've done that, go ahead and grab your next dowel, and we're going to repeat the process. Nice amount of glue around that dowel, line it up over one of the holes, set it in place, and hammer it in. And now we just have one more dowel. When you're finished, your dowels should lay flush against the edge of the seat. If you have any that are sticking out a little bit, you can just give them a little tap with your hammer. And then you can go ahead and just wipe up any excess glue. All right, now the last thing to do is attach our leg stop. So I have my leg stop here, and you'll notice that in this flat edge, there's 3 holes. What I'm going to start by doing is squeezing a good amount of glue into each of these holes. I don't want to completely fill the hole up, but maybe about halfway. Next, I'm going to go ahead and spread a nice amount of glue along this flat edge. Once I've got a bunch of glue on there, I'm going to go ahead and spread it out evenly with my finger. And again, you want to spread out enough glue so that you can't see the wood edge underneath it. Once you've done that, you're going to go ahead and flip this over so that those pre-drilled holes align with the dowels in our seat. And I'm just going to kind of feed it down in here and make sure everything's nice and aligned. Once it's lined up, I'm going to go ahead and tap it down onto the seat. But I don't want to damage this, so if you want, you can use your hammer block and place it over the top. And we're going to be hammering this evenly all along the top until it sits flush against the seat. Now it's all the way down and flush, and you can see that there's a bunch of glue spilling out around it. And that's actually a good sign. That shows that I used enough glue for this step. So now the last thing to do is just going to be to lift my legs up out of the way and go ahead and wipe up any of that excess glue. All right, and just like that, my portable stool is complete. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to give this glue a little bit of time to dry before I plan and decorate this portable stool. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I'll be right back. All right, I've given my stool plenty of time to dry, and I went ahead and decorated it just with some nice colors, on the different areas, and I think it turned out really nicely. Now I want to show you guys how to use your stool. What you're going to do is you're going to lift the legs straight up like this. You're going to grab the slanted cross member and you're going to pull it straight onto the leg stop like this. Once that's engaged, you can go ahead and flip it over, and then you can enjoy your stool. Now there's a couple of things that I want to talk about that are very important when it comes to using the stool safely. The first thing is that you must wait at least 24 hours after assembling the stool before sitting on it. That gives the glue time to set and dry and make sure that the stool is going to be safe to sit on. Beyond that, we want to make sure that the stool is going to last a long time. So we need to sit on it safely and responsibly. The stool is meant to support up to 250 pounds, but should not have anyone sitting on it that exceeds 300 pounds. Additionally, when you're sitting on the stool, you want to make sure that you're sitting flat with your feet squarely on the ground, and you're not leaning or rocking in the stool, because this can cause different parts of the joints or the glue bonds to break. So it's really important that you follow these safety guidelines in order to be able to enjoy your portable stool for a long time. And as long as you do that, you can take this stool with you out to the park or the beach, to a sports game, or just anywhere you want to enjoy a nice place to sit. I'm going to go take this with me and find some cool places to sit myself, but I really appreciate you guys stopping by to build this with me on Elemental Hardware Enrichment. My name is Aiden, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next one.